Good morning on this lovely cold February morning. I decided that in honor of the month of love of February, where we celebrate Valentine's Day, that one of the things I would make is something that my family loves so much, which is chicken meatballs with my homemade marinara and spaghetti. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you today. In honor of that, I wore my friend Sue's pin, which is a rose pin that she gave me, and I thought that it would help us perk things up a little bit in this month of February. The first thing I have is a pound of chicken meat, and I get my chicken meat boneless, skinless, with no cartilage added from the Eastern Market down in Detroit. And I'm going to put the recipe on this video so that you'll have it. The first thing I'm going to do is add 1 egg. I also add a bunch of onions. This was 1 very large chopped onion, but I'm not going to use the whole thing. I'm going to use some of these leftover onions for the sauce. Then I'm going to add about a half a cup right now of seasoned breadcrumbs. I add some crushed garlic. That's about the equivalent of 4 or 5 cloves. Some parsley. Nice healthy dose to give it some flavor. And then the thing that makes it taste the best, which is a blend of Romano Parmesan cheese that I have grated freshly at the Italian store. Near us it's called Cantoro's. And I put a good, I'd say about a half of a cup in there. Finally, you want to season your meatballs with lots of freshly ground pepper, and a healthy teaspoon of salt. You can use a wooden spoon to mix this all together, and I'm going to try to do that today since I don't want my hands to get too dirty, but normally I use my clean hands to mix this all together. Now that it's been all thoroughly mixed together, what I do is I put a pan with some olive oil on my burner, and I use a heavy cast iron skillet that's been well seasoned. I think that's the best way to make these, but really you can do them in any skillet you have. I have already had this started to heat, so you can see that there's a little bit of smoke going on in the burner. I'm going to take fairly healthy portions of my meat mixture, and I'm going to roll them into nice little meatballs and put them in the pan. You want to do this pretty quickly because you want your meatballs to all be cooking evenly close to the same time. Now, my mom used to take these, and instead of browning them on the stove, she would put them on a pan, a sheet tray, and she would throw them in the oven at about 400 to brown them in the oven. I don't tend to do that because my family likes the nice crust that gets on these when you pan fry them. All right, so now I have got all my meatballs in my skillet, and I am browning them. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit and I just counted and I have about 28 meatballs from 1 pound of meat. We obviously won't eat that many meatballs, so I can stick these in the freezer once I have browned them, and I can use them for another meal. So I have been browning these for the last several minutes, and you can see that, hopefully you can see this, they're pretty browned on all sides. Once I have them browned, you're not really cooking them through at this point. You're just wanting to get that nice crust on them. Again, I'll hold that up for the camera. It's just a nice fawn. That brownness is called fawning, what's left in the pan. And one of our favorite cooks that we used to like to watch on TV, Ann Burrell, used to say, brown food tastes good. And we couldn't agree with her more. So I always try to get this nice brown on every one of the meatballs. And then I'm going to put them into a casserole dish. I'm using a Corningware dish that was my mother's. And there's going to be 4 of us eating these tonight, so I'm counting on 4 per person, and with a couple leftovers. So I'm going to put 20 of these in here, into my casserole dish. Maybe I'll put this little baby one in there too. And then tomorrow, these will be left over for my husband to have. He'll enjoy those as leftovers. This is what they look like inside the casserole dish. And I will show you now how I make my sauce. All right, we're back and I'm making the sauce. Normally, I would use a big pot like this because I make sauces and freeze them. But today, to show you what I'm doing with this particular sauce, I'm going to use the exact same pan that I used to make the meatballs in. I have not added anything because it still has the fat and olive oil from the meatballs, and I'm just adding the rest of my onion, which is the equivalent of a regular sized onion. In addition to that, I'm going to turn my heat on low, and I'm going to brown these along with some more garlic. And I'm using already minced garlic. You can use fresh garlic, and I use quite a bit of garlic. So this is the equivalent of a good 4 or 5 cloves. And I just stir it all around the pan. And you want to pick up any of those little browned bits from cooking your meatballs. And then just let that hang out and simmer for a little while until those onions turn translucent. All right, I've been sauteing my onions and garlic so that it gets clear and translucent. And it's picked up all the brown pieces in the pan from the meatballs. And that adds so much flavor. You don't want to forget to do that. You can always deglaze your pan with a little bit of red wine, and that would also help you pick up the brown bits. So now I'm going to add my tomato sauce, and my sauce is quite thin. because I processed this from my garden tomatoes over the summer and then froze it. You can use crushed tomatoes, diced tomatoes, whole tomatoes. My husband likes it smooth and not chunky at all, and that's why I use it like this. I process it until it's smooth. So if you're looking for the equivalent in the grocery store, it would be some large cans of tomato sauce. I'm talking about like the 28 ounces, at least a couple of those. And I don't want one bit of this to go to waste. Once that is starting to warm through, the next thing I do is add my various herbs. Now I have an Italian neighbor that I grew up with next to. Her name is Sherry Zanetti. And Sherry, this is a shout out to you. Sherry always taught us, she taught my mother, who also taught me, to add a sprinkle or two of cinnamon and about a tablespoon or so of sugar to your tomato sauce. And Sherry always taught us that that cuts down on the acidity of the tomatoes and brings out the natural sweetness. And so as of about probably 45, 50 years ago, that's what we always have done with our sauces, since we learned that nifty little trick from Sherry. I'm also going to add some parsley. If you have fresh parsley, that goes great. I'm going to add some Italian seasoning. You can add individual seasonings. You could add your own oregano, your own basil, your own rosemary, things like that. But I end up getting the Italian seasoning because it's got all that in it. I add a few dashes of crushed red pepper flakes just to give it a little kick. And then finally, I add several heaping tablespoons of tomato paste. And that's because my sauce tends to be thin because of using my garden tomatoes. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and add the whole can to this today. Mix this all together. And what you're going to want to do is let this simmer for about an hour, half an hour to an hour. I think the longer it simmers, the better the flavors meld together. And in order for it not to evaporate very much, I cover it with a lid, with an offset lid. I bring it to a strong simmer or low boil and then reduce it to simmer. All right, my sauce has been cooking and simmering for about a half an hour. You can see here that it is nice and thick. The tomato paste really helps thicken it up. So now what I do is I take my pan that I have the meatballs in, and, well, you know what, before I do that, I should tell you, I always test my sauce for saltiness. And it's at this point that I adjust my seasonings. So I did not add any salt or pepper to this, so I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt and some ground black pepper. Okay. sauce is good. And I'm just going to mix that in. You can always taste it a second time and add more salt as you deem necessary or to your taste. All right. Now I'm going to add some sauce on top of my meatballs. And you can see I'm just ladling it over the meatballs. That flavor of those tomatoes in the sauce from my garden just harkens me back to September and October when we harvested so many of these tomatoes and processed them. It's so wonderful. We got over 1,000 tomatoes off of only 4 plants this past summer. All right, now, once I have my sauce in my pan covering my meatballs, and you want a pretty liberal amount of sauce. As you can see, I put a good 2 to 3 cups. I'm now going to add some shredded mozzarella cheese. If you have fresh mozzarella, that's good to use too. During the pandemic, I'm not getting out to the store as much, so I don't have fresh mozzarella right now, but if I had it, I would use it. You can also sprinkle on Parmesan, Romano, really any kind of cheese that suits you. Then I will cover this and cook it at 375 for about an hour until the meatballs are cooked through. And I'm also going to boil up some pasta and use that in this leftover sauce, which I'll leave in the pan and actually add the spaghetti to the sauce. This is such a delicious, comforting meal, but it's really on a budget. To feed 4 people with healthy portions is under $10. Can't beat the price, and your family will love you for it. And I just pulled these out of the oven. You can see they're nice and steamy. I will probably put them back in for about 5 minutes to get the cheese a little bit browned. You can put them in under the broiler. Once I serve these with the spaghetti, I'll do one last clip to show you what it all looks like as I pull it together. We're back, and I have been rewarming my sauce because it's almost time to eat. And so you can see that the sauce is nice and warm. And I have boiled some pasta. I saved the pasta water in case I need to thin this out at all. What I'm going to do is just add the pasta directly to the pan. Yes, it's a little messy. Once your pasta is in the pot, you simply turn it all around and mix it together with the sauce so that it marries. We're ready to pull this whole thing together. So the first thing I do is put a nice healthy portion of pasta on the plate. And then I grab a couple of meatballs. And my husband will be my official taste tester. It's all going to be hot, so be careful. Fresh pasta is not easy to get apart.
That's really good.
I hope you enjoy it, everyone.